to our event this evening, the first in a series of events we'll be holding this year. I'm especially delighted to see two longtime friends of the Center with us to help lead a conversation on a critical set of issues, Akbar Ahmed and Sally Quinn, who I'll introduce in a little more detail in a moment. I don't have to tell you today how important this topic of Islam in America is. We're on the eve of another commemoration of the September 11th attacks. We have a raging controversy about a mosque near Ground Zero. We have a pastor who, until about an hour ago, was determined to burn the Quran. This weekend, he's since stepped back, so that's a hopeful sign. And of course, we're at the end of Ramadan, the holiest month of the Islamic calendar, which is why we're meeting a bit earlier this evening in time to break the fast. Since we're in Washington, D.C., and it's the election season, I'm a political scientist. I'll mention the fact that, as I think all of you know, according to a recent poll, some 20% or so of Americans believe that Barack Obama is a Muslim, which I think is a sad commentary on the state of public knowledge, to say the least, but also a reminder of how this issue is now at the forefront of public consciousness, the issue of Islam in America. This may be the time in our history where it's most salient, more salient than ever before. So there's a lot to talk about. And as I said, we're fortunate to have Ambassador Akbar Ahmed with us, one of the foremost experts on Islam, to take us through some of this difficult and interesting terrain. I could give Akbar a long and detailed introduction, but I will keep it brief. You have a distinguished career behind you as a Pakistani diplomat. You're a professor at American University. You have published widely and received many honors on a variety of topics relating to Islam, culture, politics, and world affairs. I'd just like to highlight this most recent publication, Journey into America, The Challenge of Islam. It's available outside the door. It's really a remarkable study, a collaborative study. We'll hear some more about it tonight, based on more than a year of research, a research team that went out across America and conducted in-depth interviews with Muslims and with their neighbors from all walks of life, I think spanning some 70 cities and towns and over 100 mosques. So tremendous resource, real knowledge that we need perhaps now more than ever as we grapple with these ongoing public policy and public controversies. Now, for our conversation, I'm also delighted that we have Sally Quinn, another longtime friend of the Center, here with us today. Sally is well known to just about all of you, I think, as the creator, really, as well as the manager of what I consider the most important, the most influential online destination for people who want to learn about the intersection of religion, culture, society, and politics. That's the Washington Post On Faith page. And we've been privileged to partner with On Faith. It's been 3 years now since we began. There's a Georgetown On Faith section that I invite you to visit, with faculty blogs, a variety of other resources, including a video feature entitled Faith Complex. So Sally, I'm grateful for our collaboration and thankful that you can be with us here tonight. Just a couple of words about format. We don't have a lot of time. We've got about an hour. And so what we thought we'd do is Sally and Akbar would have a conversation for about 30 minutes, at which point I'll come back to the podium and take questions and guide a broader conversation. So again, thank you all for coming, and with that I'll turn it over to you, Sally.
So Akbar, what's new?
Well, Sally, the newest is 3 big possible breakthroughs. Sarah is one of the 3 hikers caught and kept captive in Iran, is on her way back, inshallah. The pastor has cancelled his program to burn the Quran. And there's rumors that the imam may be shifting the site of the mosque. So the biggest possible news developing as we are sitting here to speak.
Why don't we just start with the Iranian,
Yeah.
just so you can briefly tell us about that before we get into the whole mosque debate.
Well, Sally, that is a human story. There's so many young people here in front of me. These 3 hikers, most of them your age, were picked up. Now, I don't want to go into the right doing or the wrong doing, whether they were right or wrong, but they landed up as captives in Iran. And one of them, the girl Sarah, is critically ill. She has cancer, it's developing rapidly, she's in isolation. Her mother's had the impact of her daughter being in jail and in prison. She's grievously ill. The families of all 3 are seriously ill now, and the effects of their children being in captivity for so long, and the uncertainty is affecting the entire families. And I came into the story, Sally, and you came into the story for me, when Laura, the mother of Josh, one of the hikers in captivity, approached me and came to see me in Washington. And she said, I haven't so far appealed to an Islamic scholar, and I'd like you to do something. So I was very moved by what she told me, and we, of course, in the office began to get all the background and the stories from the 3 mothers. And then I wrote a personal letter, an appeal to the Grand Ayatollah, the Supreme Leader. It was the month of fasting. I appealed to him purely as a Muslim to a Muslim to show generosity and compassion. And you were very kind, Sally. You published the letter in On Faith, and your brilliant editor, Elizabeth Tennety, you had it up immediately, and that was picked up very widely, repeated all over the world. And of course, today we heard the good news, so I know that many people have been trying, the State Department, many other sources. The fact is, Sally, that in this world in which we are living, there is such a dearth of compassion, because individuals are being caught up in these confrontations between governments, between religions, between systems, that very often the individual is just simply ground down by what he or she faces. And these 3 are good examples of that. So if there's one bit of good news, it should elate and delight all of us.
So one of them is out, the other 2 are not out yet?
Not yet, but the logic would be if she is released on the basis of an argument, that they would follow soon, because all 3 are in for the same reasons.
Right.
So hopefully they should be out soon.
Let's move on to the story of the hour, story of the last 30 minutes, really. And that is that Pastor Terry Jones has apparently canceled his plan to burn the Koran in Florida on Saturday. Now, he has given us his reason for doing this, that Imam Faisal has agreed to move the location of the mosque at Ground Zero. We have not been able to confirm that. I have a call into Imam Faisal's wife, Daisy Khan, who's also one of the co-founders of Cordoba House. I've got my cell phone right here. I told her to call me immediately, and I would answer the phone if she calls.
That really is breaking news.
Let me know whether that's true or not. I'm a little suspicious about it, because my feeling is that Imam Faisal had a piece in the New York Times this week saying that he was not going to move the, and I can't imagine that Pastor Terry Jones would hear it before anyone else. So that does make me a little suspicious.
Well, Sally, Pastor Terry Jones does have direct contact with the divine, you know that, to God. So he has an advantage over you and me.
So in any case, that's sort of up in the air. But the whole issue of what's happening to Islam in America has really been, I think, brought to a head by these 2 events. And it's what everyone is talking about. I mean, Islam in America is a huge issue, and it's something that resonates all over the world. It's not just in this country. Do you have any thoughts about Pastor Jones specifically?
I find him fascinating because in these travels of ours, we came across many people like him. He's sincere in his own environment, in his own culture. He reflects something in society. He's firmly convinced that he's right. His ideas of religion are right. And of course, this is a free country. He's entitled to those ideas. And Islam, for some reason now, is the target of his particular religious wrath. And he logically followed this argument to the burning of the Quran, which he sees as the symbol of evil. Islam is the religion of evil.
Even though he's never read the Quran.
Even though he's never. Remember that rationality or knowledge or logic don't come into this. It's just religious passion. Now, what he came up against, which I found fascinating, was I've been following this story. I, in fact, wrote something appealing to him weeks ago, in which I got the Bishop of Washington, the senior rabbi, Imam Majid, and several other people to support me in that appeal to the pastor, that he's come up against a force which forced him to back down. This I found very interesting, because he seems to be a very determined, even obstinate man. You have the President of the United States, the President of Indonesia, the President of Pakistan, General David Petraeus, everyone appealing to him, church leaders, religious leaders, and he just dismissed them. And then something happens, and he actually backs down. So we are seeing these clashes of ideas, clashes of prejudices, ignorance, lack of knowledge. And again, in the midst, you have individuals being caught up. One of the results of this ignorance of Islam, the prejudice against Islam, is the taxi driver in New York who was actually asked by a passenger, "Are you a Muslim?" And he said, "I'm a Muslim." And the passenger leaned forward and slashed his throat and almost killed him. And he said, "I've been here for 3 decades, and I have children who are born here. And for the first time, I feel frightened and scared of the future. And I'm scared of my children." Now, I would say, Sally, because we are discussing this most urgent of issues in America, it is a discussion around Islam. It is also a discussion about American identity. This is really America and American society debating itself. This America debating its own identity. What kind of America wants for the 21st century? Islam happens to be the board against which you bounce your ideas. And it happens to be at this moment in time the hot subject, the hot issue in the hot seat. But it really is these alternative paradigms that are in front of us. And think about it. Is it going to be the America of the Founding Fathers? The America that has attracted people like me to America? That's the reason I'm here. The America of Washington, Jefferson, Franklin. The America where the Founding Fathers, and some of you may know this, we are on one of the great campuses in the country. John Adams calling the Prophet of Islam one of the greatest truth seekers of history, up there with Confucius and Socrates. Franklin calling the Prophet of Islam a model of compassion. Jefferson owning the Quran and hosting the first iftar at the White House. And Washington, as we know, reaching out to the Jews, reaching out to the Muslims. These are the Founding Fathers. Jefferson has a statue outside the university he built with an angel holding a tablet. Religious freedom, 1786, and he's got God, Jehovah, Allah, Brahma, Atma. Now can you imagine that in the late 18th century, you have a founding father thinking of a society which is truly global. He's not only thinking of the Abrahamic faiths, he's thinking of the non-Abrahamic faiths. He's even including Hinduism. Now this goes, Sally, directly against those Americans who today are opposed to that kind of America, because for a lot of people I hear in the media, Islam is the perennial enemy, it's either Islam or America, Islam is intrinsically opposed to America, and there's an incompatibility between these two civilizations. And I ask myself, have these people read the Founding Fathers?
Listen, one of the things I'd like you to do is to take the mosque at Ground Zero, which is not a mosque, not at Ground Zero, but take that issue and sort of analyze why you think that set off such a firestorm. Because it went along for a year. The city council passed it, the mayor was in favor of it, the community, the rabbis, everybody thought it was a great idea, no problem. And then I think it was Peter King, the congressman, who latched onto it, almost as sort of political reasons, and started making noise about it, and it started, getting a drum beat, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it got to be a mosque, which is instead of a community
Yes.
center with prayer rooms, and then it became at Ground Zero as opposed to 2.5 blocks away. How do you see that? How did this happen?
I, Sally, see it as the intersection of what's happening in America today. So it reflects a sort of Islamophobia, a prejudice, a dislike of things Muslim. So here's an Islamic center, which people see immediately as a mosque and very near Ground Zero. I see it as insensitivity on the part of the Muslim leaders who thought that they could build such a huge physical architecture so near Ground Zero and get away with it, not fully appreciating that Ground Zero is hallowed ground, it's almost sacred ground for the majority of people in this country, whether we accept that or not. That is the reality. And as I traveled for this project last year throughout America, I became very conscious that 9/11 has become part of American identity. Do you know, for example, that 9/11 is now featured on the base of the Statue of Liberty? So the quintessential symbol of American identity, the Statue of Liberty, now is associated forever with 9/11. And 9/11 forever is associated with Muslims. It is that integral in terms of American identity. It is also politics. As you say, politicians got involved and Sarah Palin came in, Newt Gingrich came in. It is also the president, the first non-white president in the White House. So there's also that disquiet. The fact that 20 or 30% of Americans believe he's Muslim is not accidental. That's also pointing to something. So if Islam is evil, Islam is alien, Islam is violent, not to be trusted, and un-American religion, and the president is a secret Muslim, therefore the president is bad. There's a logic to this. And you combine all this, a well-meaning but somewhat naive, I would say, leader of this Cordoba initiative, Imam Rauf. I know him, I respect him, but I don't think he thought through the consequences of his actions. Having jumped in, planned something, and now he's taken aback. Your friend Daisy Khan keeps saying, I listen to her interviews, I'm surprised, I'm shocked, how did this backlash develop? Doesn't she know American culture? Doesn't she understand the American landscape? That Ground Zero is really hallowed ground. That there would be a time sooner or later when there would be a reaction. So why make yourself vulnerable? At a time when there is an air of Islamophobia in America, why add fuel to the fire? Because the Imam started off with the well-meaning intentions of bringing people together. And yet, paradoxically, because he's a man of peace, he's ended up by separating people. This has divided families and homes and communities throughout the United States and now globally. And globally now, as you know, Sally, Geert Wilders is arriving on 9/11. He'll be at Ground Zero, and I'm told he's being received by some very prominent Americans. The Dutch politicians. The Dutch politician Geert Wilders, who believes not only in banning the Quran and closing all the mosques in Holland, but also deporting the Muslims in Holland. So he's, again, following a logical path in his arguments. So we are seeing a conflation of several different lines in the crisis around the mosque. The mosque itself is simply a catalyst. It could have been the burning of the Quran. Tomorrow it could be another crisis, but it will be a crisis linking with Islam, because Islam is such a hot topic today in America. I go back to the notion of American identity. So it is America that really needs to understand whether it can accept and tolerate and incorporate a minority like the Muslims and be at ease with it, or whether everything the minority does will irritate it and anger it and create this atmosphere of crisis.
You know, what's interesting to me, Akbar, is that people know you to be a very open-minded, liberal-minded, pluralistic person. And I think that there were an awful lot of people who have been surprised at your reaction about the mosque, because we do have the First Amendment, we do have freedom of religion. Many people thought that by condemning the mosque at Ground Zero, that you're basically allowing people all over the rest of the country to say, we don't want a mosque in our town or in our neighborhood or whatever. And that by standing up and saying, you know, this is what we believe in, if we cave on our own Constitution our own rights, then what kind of an example are we going to show to the rest of the world when we're asking them to be as open-minded and pluralistic as we are?
Sally, I think my position has been misrepresented. As a Muslim, I will always support a mosque. I will always support any house of worship. I've actually built mosques in my life. I've been a commissioner in the field, and it's allowed me to build mosques and support them. Having said that, I'm also highly conscious that there's something called the sociological laws of cause and effect. You do something and something happens. If you're going to build a mosque and it's going to create division and unhappiness and pain, and the victim will be the Muslim, then I would rather not have a mosque. For me, a mosque is mortar and bricks and cement. Human life is the most precious thing. I'm talking as a Muslim. God tells me as a Muslim that you can worship me anywhere. In the desert, under a tree, out in the open, or in a house, call it a mosque. But always respect and preserve human life. So if I were to weigh the unhappiness it is causing and has caused Muslims against the idea, it's not even a mosque, it's not even an Islamic center, it's an idea for an Islamic center, there's no question where I would go. So I've always qualified this. Now, I know that in debates in America, I say this with some reservation and respect, tend to be very black and white. You know, you're with us or against it, most ably personified by your previous president, so that either you accept me or don't accept me. Here's a red line. I don't see life like that. I'm a scholar. For me, it's important to do analysis, to try to tease out the complexity in a situation, to point out the diverse strands that are taking place. And that's my job. So when this debate began, and I was often labeled as, you're against the mosque, I said, how can I as a Muslim be against a mosque? But listen to me. Listen to me that ultimately this is going to lead to problems, which it is leading to. And now if it is true that the Imam is backed out, then Sally, who has been right all along, you or me?
Well, you don't know what I think.
I know what you think. I know what you think, because you represent, and rightly so, you and many, many wonderful Americans and great friends of mine represent what you should be representing, which is pluralist America. But this is not about pluralist America alone. Remember that the Founding Fathers, Washington's great book, and the only book he wrote, is about civility, about respect for each other. It isn't just saying that we must do what we are allowed to do under the Constitution. It is also to be able to live in a civilized society. So you have the right to do this, so that does the pastor. The pastor under your Constitution can go and burn the Quran. So why did you object to that? Why did you force him virtually from the president to General Petraeus? Put so much pressure he had to back off, because you all felt, and rightly, that he was doing something wrong. Now from the opposite end, and I'm not making a comparison, because obviously the pastor's aim was to hurt people, Imam Raus was to bring people together, but the end result of both was to be creating division and pain and hatred and controversy. And to me, watching this drama, that saddens me and makes me unhappy. So if I can do something to, as a scholar, to point out that, look, this is going to lead to this and will create problems later on, it's my duty to do so. And that's what I did.
You know, one of the things that's interesting is that Daisy Khan spoke to the Council on Foreign Relations last week.
I know, yes.
Were you on the...
No, I couldn't. I was busy.
And I asked her if anyone had, in all of the people who had complained about building the mosque, which is a little over 2 blocks away from Ground Zero, if anyone had, Sarah Palin, Newt Gingrich, all the people who were against it, if any one person had said to her, here is the line that you have to draw, and is it 3 blocks? Is 3 blocks okay? Is 4 blocks okay? Is 5 blocks okay? Where do you draw the line? Not one person has said, you can't build it 2 blocks away, but you can build it 4 blocks away. And, you know, I mean, how do you measure, because it's not at Ground Zero, how do you measure that?
It is, I completely agree, Sandy, that, and you have to make a stand, I'm not saying don't. The great model for us in this country are those great African American leaders of the 60s, and the people who supported them. You know, these great figures, JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. and so on. They were making a stand for big issues, and that is the battle you have to fight. pluralist America has to fight that battle to preserve the identity of America as pluralist America. But to fight it on an issue like this, which 70% of America is protesting, and don't underestimate it, the fact that Imam Rauf said in some interview that these are, I think he called them a minority, and someone called them bigots, and someone called them racist. That's not correct. Some of them may be racist and bigots, but a lot of them genuinely feel that any Islamic or a structure reminiscent of Islam so close to ground zero is painful. Now, a mosque is dear to me, an Islamic center is dear to me. I've been to Imam Rauf's mosque. It's in my book, the description of my visit to the mosque. But if it's going to cause so much pain, and people are threatening to blow it up, and people are threatening to attack it, and workers are threatening to not work on the site, I'm asking myself, why are you creating problems for a minority that already has so many problems? What is the logic? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Do you think that of the 70% of Americans who say they're against this, that the majority of them know what it is that they're against?
No, you're absolutely right, because again, in traveling throughout America, we discovered, my team and I, that most Americans, even after 9/11, when there's such important reasons to understand Islam, really have the foggiest idea of Islam, even today. And the reasons, Sally, are twofold, as I see them. Number one, the failure of Muslim leadership. Muslims are an important minority in this country, 7, 8 million, whatever the number is. There are some very important figures, they're scholars, they're academics, they're doctors, some of them are very well off. But as a community, they failed to make an impact on America, so that America still doesn't know what Islam is. Now, that's a failure to me. That
Why?
10
Why
years
is
later.
that? Why did that? Why?
How many Muslims do you see? Now, it may be that they're being kept out, maybe there's some conspiracy, but I'm just analyzing it in terms of what is. How many Muslims do you see in the media? How many do you see writing columns? How many do you see as public figures? How many in the Congress?
We see you.
I'm very recent here. I'm talking about the genuine Muslim community here. In Congress, you've got 2 African Americans, wonderful representatives from the community, but that's it. So the impact that needs to be made has not been made. They're there, they're doing well, they're in their niche, but not making an impact. Now, it's more complex. Because they failed to make an impact, that vacuum around them, what is Islam? Who are these Muslims which Americans are asking after 9/11? That vacuum was filled by a lot of writers who were hostile to Islam. So a lot of writers, and you know them, you're an intellectual in Washington, a lot of writers who are writing books like The Terrorists Next Door, Muslims are evil intrinsically, the Quran preaches violence. Those writers were writing bestsellers. So as we traveled, we came across a lot of Americans who had not met a Muslim before. This wasn't infrequent. Again and again we'd be asked. I had my team, these all young Americans, but I was a Muslim, so we'd be sitting in a room and they'd say, we've never met a Muslim before. Again and again. And we read this about Islam, it's supposed to be a violent religion, it's a terrorist religion. There was a double failure. A failure of Muslims to explain themselves, and of some Americans to deliberately distort the image of Islam in America. Deliberately. So there was this pumping out of literature coming constantly, and it's there in the market. And the results are devastating. So Americans today are truly baffled. So almost 10 years after 9/11, when the gap widened between Muslims and non-Muslims, 10 years after 9/11, that gap has not really closed. All the polls confirm this. Pew, Gallup, all the polls.
Are you about to finish off?
I think in the interest of time, we've covered a lot of ground in the conversation so far, but let's open it to you all. And I'd ask you to form a line at the central mic and ask a question, introduce yourself briefly, and while that line is forming, maybe I'll jump in and ask a question right.
Tom, I thought Abby was going to ask the first question.
Well, you mentioned the polls, Akbar, and how things really haven't gotten better. If you look 5 years ago at public attitudes toward Islam among Americans, if you look at the tensions in the public sphere now, the anxieties around Islam, 5 years ago to today, things haven't gotten better. Where was the missed opportunity? It relates back to some of the things you've mentioned already. Were there things that could have been done, should have been done in a systematic way, or are we kind of victims of just the development of the broader trends in society that you mentioned?
Tom, that's a great question. It's a question that I ask myself as a Muslim. And I talk to Muslim leaders and I really ask it of them. But before I answer it, Tom, I do want to thank you for organizing this. And I want to thank Sally for coming here. I want to thank the Berkeley Center, all of you, the guests here this evening. I know they are ambassadors and very distinguished friends of ours here. To Melody and the Berkeley Center for organizing it on behalf of Zeenath, my wife, and my children. I know Omar is here and Babar. And of course my daughter, Tom, who's with you at Georgetown, Nafis. Where's Nafis? Nafis,
you have to embarrass your daughter. It wouldn't be a complete event, right?
Tom, she threatened me. She said, if you do that, I'll kill you.
All right, okay. I'll protect you.
And Tom, I must acknowledge my team who traveled with me. They're all here. Frankie, Haley, Jonathan, they're all here. I don't know where they are, but they're sprinkled throughout in the audience. So, Tom, the answer is this. 9/11 opened up the biggest opportunity for Muslims to explain themselves. Here we are. Americans had seen Muslims in two forms. The African Americans, who I call the first Muslims, and they have proved and given some remarkable leaders, but they are unknown in America. Imam W.D. Muhammad, who to me is like Martin Luther in America, he's as significant as that. And I ask Americans whether they've heard his name, and they haven't. Very few Americans know his name. And yet he's changed the course of Islam in America. And the immigrants coming from the Middle East and South Asia. Now these immigrants flew into America in the 80s and 90s. And they flew in as doctors, physicians, into middle class appointments. So Americans really did not see them as foreigners. They happened to be your doctor or your dentist and so on. After 9/11, Americans woke to this new phenomena of the Muslim. And they asked themselves, who are these Muslims? That was the opportunity. That was the time that the community should have fielded its scholars, its writers, its media personalities. But there was a fear in the community, Tom. Muslims were paralyzed with fear. They sort of went underground. The idea was, and the strategy was, to keep your head below the parapet. I was told this many times by Muslims. Don't speak so much, don't talk so much, people may be after you, the security agencies may go after you. And this happened. A lot of Muslims were just picked up, there were cases against some, communities were devastated. Read the book, it's a frightening picture at times of the community and what they were going through. We visited in New York a community called Little Pakistan. Half the community has been decimated, just disappeared. Half the community. And the impact of that is still felt on the community. They're living in a state of paralysis, of fear. So in that environment, Tom, it's very difficult for people to come out and begin to assert themselves, to build bridges, to reach out, because you need some confidence for that. That was the biggest failure and the biggest lost opportunity.
Tom,
And
can I just
please,
follow up?
yes.
Just one thing that I wanted to ask before. Are you afraid? Are you afraid for Muslims in this country now? And are you afraid yourself, personally?
The latter, Sally, if you know my career, I've been in charge of Waziristan in the tribal areas of Pakistan, which President Obama called the most dangerous place in the world, and I was in charge of that. So once you've been in charge of the Wazir and Masood, you are not really scared of anything, including Pastor Jones and his moustache. It doesn't worry me. But for the Muslim community, yes, I'm very concerned. I'm concerned unless Americans like you are able to reassert American religious pluralism and this identity which we are calling American pluralist identity strongly and clearly and unambiguously, we will have challenges in the coming time. It's just starting. This phase of American history is not over with the pastor cancelling the Quran. This phase of American history is just beginning. And it happened, there are mosques being attacked even now as we speak, windows being smashed, some being firebombed, some Muslims being harassed or attacked, a sense of fear in the Muslim community. This is going to grow. This has to be challenged on an American level, on a national level, not just as a kind of Muslim problem. This is a problem for America. And that is what, Sally, my aim has been, to constantly point out that we are talking of Muslims, but we are actually talking about America itself.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to some questions. Again, please introduce yourselves and keep the questions brief.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. My name is Zarina Shakir, and I'm producer and host of a television program called Perspectives, of interfaith here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And I wanted to say really very briefly that I grew up in the church and converted to Islam as an adult. And I don't know the kind of church that this Terry Jones represents. But I do want to say that one of the things that people don't know, I don't believe, is that when you talk about the hallowed ground there at Ground Zero, there were 20,000 African slaves, enslaved people, whose bones were found and stacked 5 rows on top of one another.
This is on Ground Zero,
where Ground Zero is. And so if we're talking about hallowed ground, and also keeping in mind, as you know, Dr. Ahmed, for 50 to 60% of the Africans brought to America were Muslims. So we should be at that space at this point. Thank you.
Thank you for informing us of that, Zarina. I didn't know. That's a startling fact that you've given us. Thank you for sharing that.
Dave Robinson with World Vision. I'm responsible for Christian-Muslim relations and humanitarian affairs. As a
Here on campus at Georgetown?
No, I'm off campus. I've admired your writing for over 20 years, sir, and as a signatory to a common word between us, do we have a new opportunity here? We've had a crisis with Pastor Jones relenting for the moment. But what opportunity is there here for Christian and Muslim leaders to redouble the efforts to look at the common ground for peace building between us?
I think that's a very encouraging and an optimistic question, because there's so much in common between the main faith in America, Christianity, and Islam. And Christianity, to me, growing up in Pakistan, and here's the paradox, because Pakistan today is going through this terrible phase, Muslims killing Muslims, Muslims killing Christians, attacking Sufi shrines, attacking minorities. It's a terrible phase, and here we then have the floods. And in the midst of the floods, the killing continues. And yet, I grew up in North Pakistan, educated in Burn Hall, which is run by the Catholic priests, one of the best schools in Pakistan. And then later at Foreman Christian College in Lahore, run by the Presbyterian teachers. Now those were the American teachers who taught me, who we respected and we loved. They were incredible people. They were warm and welcoming, and their entire aim was to educate us. Never once in my life did I have a single priest come up and say, well, these are the advantages of Christianity, convert to Christianity. Never once. So I think this is a great opportunity where America can, again, not just talk about Islam, but talk about this pluralist vision of America and genuinely reach out as a world leader. To me, the significance of the United States is that it is a world leader. It is a leader with a world vision. When you look at the Founding Fathers, they may have been situated in America, but they really are talking of a new kind of society that did not exist anywhere on this planet. If you see what's happening in the rest of the world in the late 18th century, you will see despots and dynasties and all kinds of tyrannies. And then suddenly in America we have this vision of a new society. That is the vision that Americans today in the 21st century have to take to the rest of the world. Because we are in a terrible cycle of crises as a world civilization. We have these natural catastrophes, Katrina and Haiti and the tsunami, that's on one level. But on another level, we have local wars and religious wars and racial wars, and we seem to be out of control, a world out of control in many senses. This is where America has to show leadership, clear moral leadership. And it can only come when it disentangles itself from this obsessive relationship with Islam. It really is almost obsessive. It's eating itself, and it's eating the Muslim world. And it is of no avail. It makes no sense to me. What is America fighting for when the two civilizations can be friends and allies? There's so much that is mutual. When I talk throughout this journey, Muslims would tell me in private, they tell me and my team in private that this is the best place in the world to be a Muslim. Think of it. This is years after 9/11. And they're talking in private, they could say anything to me. And we are talking about the mosque just being attacked or something happening in the community, they would still say this is the best place to be a Muslim. Who are your heroes? In private, some would say Thomas Jefferson. Think of a Muslim saying, my role model is Thomas Jefferson. And I would ask why. I asked an Orthodox Muslim, head of an Orthodox organization, and he said because the US Constitution is completely compatible with Islam. We emphasize knowledge, pluralism, respect for others, respect for religion, respect for family life, respect for science and learning. That is what America is. That's what the Constitution is. So again, I say what I told Sally. If America can live up to its own ideals, we have no problem. That is the challenge.
Assalamu alaikum. How are you, Dr. Akbar? I'm Imam bin Abdul Haq. And really, Dr. Akbar, you just took what I wanted to ask you, really. That would you agree that the Constitution of America is being challenged by its human constitution? The human constitution, what I mean, is our sensitivities as human beings. As you mentioned Islam, that's what Islam teaches. That's more important than what we may write. But I also wanted to do a little reverse here. Since you all mentioned, you had mentioned so many people had never heard of Muslims, I was wondering how many people here know Muslims, know someone. Raise your hand if you know a Muslim. So when you said that, I was thinking, what about the crowd here? How many of us, and I want to say one more thing too, that there are many of us who are imams, who do support the same view that Dr. Akbar said. But many of you don't know that because you don't hear from us. The media has a tendency of putting sensationalism on television instead of common sense. If the mosque at so-called ground zero was going to cause, as we say in Islam, fitna, confusion, then we would rather have peace. Islam is about being a peacemaker, not a peace breaker. About building bridges, not burning bridges. That is the Islam that I came to know as a person who came into Islam as a teenager, and now I'm 55 years old. That's the Islam I know. The Islam that some of you are seeing on television, that's not the Islam we know. And so I commend my friend Dr. Akbar Ahmed. And I love what he's doing, and I want you all to know he's not alone. Many of us imams, and I see his wife and family.
Ben, please tell Sally that she thinks I'm all alone.
No, he's not alone. He's been trying to get me for 10 years to come out. I chose not to because of the type of work I do. But I do some other things dealing with the American government. And at that time, I wasn't willing to come out. But I'm willing to come out now because he can't continue to do this alone. We have to start coming together, and not just the Muslims, all of us. If the Muslims and Christians and Jews, if I may just take one more minute and say this, the Jewish theme, usually you hear the Jewish people speak of justice. You hear Christians say that Christianity is love. And Muslims love to say that Islam is peace. But on all three of those words, we're challenged. Where's the justice when there's no justice for Palestinians? Where's the love when there's no love for thy neighbor when we have a disagreement with our Christian brothers and sisters? And where's the peace from the Muslims when someone disagrees with a Muslim and then they want to go and act violently? A person who acts violently in Islam, as opposed to taking the position of peace, is acting out of accord of their nature as a Muslim. The Prophet, peace be upon him, and I'm going to say this and I'll close out. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that the pen is mightier than the sword. He said the ink of the scholar is more precious than the blood of the martyr.
Now that's a beautiful saying. Ben, please repeat that.
That the pen of the
ink.
The ink of the scholar is more precious than the blood of the martyr.
Just imagine what he's just said. In America, Islam is associated with violence. And here's a saying of the Prophet in which he clearly, unambiguously asserts the importance of knowledge even over martyrdom.
And last, what I'd like to say, at least, as you mentioned in regards to ground zero, some Muslims want to be obstinate and say, no, we have a constitutional right. But they forget what Islam teaches about the human rights or the human constitution. Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, when he had to write a treaty with his enemies, his pagan enemies, and they didn't want to recognize him as the messenger of God. Normally, if someone said, well, no, he is the messenger, they would react obstinately. The Prophet, peace be upon him, showed wisdom. He said, no, strike it. We want to have a treaty of peace so that we can make the pilgrimage to Mecca. Go and study the history. Many things that people say about the Quran, or it teaches violence. No, the violence that you may think is violence mentioned in the Quran, historically, is only there when the Muslims had to defend themselves.
All right.
So I'll just close with that. But it's much more we can say. It's so much more. I would encourage all of you to read it for yourself. That's what converted me to Islam. I didn't like any religion as a child. And my mother was a Christian preacher. I couldn't stand religion. But before she passed, she gave up being a Christian preacher to join me in Islam. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, let's get 2 questions at a time from now on. So maybe both of you could pose your questions.
All right, I do have a question. Fatima Jane Casewood, Eid Mubarak side. Don't you think it's something, there's quite important deficiencies in the American educational system that people are so ignorant about Islam, particularly when they get to this university level?
And my name's Scott Eric. I'd like to ask, how do you feel is the best way, for lack of a better word, to combat the rhetoric that, as you say, is pumped out every day by like Pam Geller, Robert Spencer, things like that? Thank you.
Well, the 2 questions are related. It's really about knowledge. The first question about the deficiency of the educational system. Well, if you think you have a problem in America, think of our problem in the Muslim world and the schools there. We have a problem multiplied by 100. So in America, you probably have the best schools in the world. Now, I know they're far from perfect, but we can make them better. One of the things we can make them better with is teaching more history, teaching more religions, teaching more cultures of other countries and other continents. They are rich world civilizations. I've grown up in South Asia. I was very privileged. We have ancient cultures, Hinduism, Buddhism. That is the birthplace of world civilization. And further east you have China, another world civilization. We need to understand the world in which we're living. America is the superpower, it's a leader of the world. And unless it understands the world, we have a problem. Just before we went into Iraq, now you're talking about the deficiency of education. Commentators, learned commentators, were talking for hours and hours on television, were calling Iraq Iraq. They were calling Iran Iran. Now it was embarrassing, but what could you do? These are the world leaders, and people all over the world were laughing. And they would ring me up and they would say, for God's sake, don't Americans know how to pronounce the name of the country they're about to invade? And when they turned up there, they had no idea this is Shia, this is Sunni, because they all looked alike. So it is in our interest to understand the world we are living in. Similarly with Islam. I'm constantly asked, does Islam believe in a moon god? Do you worship idols? It just leaves me staggered. I don't know how to answer. And I think Ben Amin has to start answering these. That's why I said you better come out and become an imam for the American people. Because knowledge is the key to better understanding, genuine understanding between peoples. In terms of the second question, some of the people who've been writing about Islam in negative ways and creating this stereotype of Muslims, they have created a problem for America itself. It's an own goal. Because if you're constantly saying this community is evil and potentially terrorist, you're going to end up by convincing yourself that there is something wrong with the community. They have to remember that these 7 million Muslims are American. These are American citizens. These are as good, as bad, as loyal, as patriotic as Sally Quinn and Tom Bancroft. Just because their name is Ahmed or Qureshi doesn't mean that you suspect them. 50 years back, the African Americans had to deal with this. They were lucky. They produced some extraordinary leaders, and they gave a lot of sacrifices. A lot of blood was shed, a lot of tears, but they've got what they've got. Today you have a non-white president in the White House. Muslims also have to go through this struggle. It can only happen if we become conscious that something is going wrong. And Sally, I really applaud you, because by launching On Faith, you gave a platform for a lot of Muslims to start debating and talking about this. Before this, there was no Muslim in the media. Literally, it was a blackout. So commentary on Muslims was made by non-Muslims. And I haven't seen this about any other religion. I don't hear Judaism being discussed by 4 non-Jewish figures, or Catholicism by 4 non-Catholics. But with Muslims, there'll be 4 non-Muslims telling us all kinds of things about Islam and Iraq and Iraq and Iran, and you just wonder, where have these experts been educated? And yet they're informing the American public. So yes, education, we need to learn about other peoples and cultures, And the people who are writing or misinforming us about Islam, we need Muslim scholars, not necessarily Islamic scholars, but scholars of Islam to be heard. Some of these wonderful scholars, Professor Lawrence Rosen, now he happens to be Jewish, but he's at Princeton, one of the great scholars of Islam. We never hear him in the media. As he just said, where are the African Americans? We have some extraordinary figures we met on this journey, imams particularly, African American imams. The most learned, the most compassionate, the most American of Americans. I never hear of them in the media. We hear of Islam and we equate it to Arabs. In America, in the media, say Islam equals Arab. Now, Arabs are a very important part of Islam, but it's only 18% of the Muslim world. I would like to hear the African American imams. They are wise, they're compassionate, they're Americans, they understand white America and they understand Islamic America. Bring them out, let the world see them, and let the world be guided by them.
I have a quick follow-up on that for Sally. In your answer, Akbar, you focused on the media and publications, traditional publications. Sally, could you tell us a little bit about your view of the sort of internet space as an arena for conversations, structured conversations, positive conversations, constructive conversations about Islam? What are some of the challenges you faced running On Faith in that respect?
Well, one of the big challenges is that we now have so many Muslim contributors that it's hard to run everybody. I mean, what we want is everybody's point of view, and so we are extremely pluralistic. I mean, we have Muslims and Catholics and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus and Wiccans and atheists and agnostics, and we want everybody's point of view, and it's really about education, as Akbar said. We want people to understand the other person's point of view, and so getting the voices, and particularly, ever since I think the first conference I ever had was here at Georgetown, and it was a conference about Muslims in America, because I just thought that this was something that was ultimately was going to end up being a big story and come to a head. And because, as Akbar was saying, 70% of the people in America are against the mosque, and I said, how many of them do you think even know what a Muslim is? And they don't. And so what we're trying to do, and what the same thing you're trying to do, Tom, and Akbar, is to try to educate people about other people's faiths, because the more they understand, the less hostile they're going to be.
And Sally, what we need to emphasize, what is common between us. I want to recite to Tom, with your permission, 2 verses. And I want to ask the audience who they think wrote these verses. Now listen to me carefully.
Thomas Jefferson? No.
I don't think he is many things, but not a poet. Okay, here's the first one. God came to my house asking for charity, and I fell on my knees trembling. Beloved, what can I give thee? I asked. Just love, he said. Just love. Who do you think wrote this?
Muhammad.
All right. The Prophet. Who other names? Who do you think wrote this? Rumi. Rumi?
Sounds like Rumi, actually.
Okay. Saint Francis. Although it could have been Rumi. Okay, here's another. Absolutely.
He said the same thing.
Okay, here's another test. I am a hole in a flute through which blows the breath of Christ. Listen to this music. I am a hole in a flute through which blows the breath of Christ. Listen to this music. Who do you think wrote this? Who? Saint Teresa. Who else? Well done. Hafiz, a Persian poet in the 14th century. Think of it. A Persian poet in the 14th century, long before the great United States of America is even discovered. And he's writing a love poem to Jesus Christ. It is the breath of life. And we are told that we are idol worshippers and moon god worshippers. That is the level of ignorance, Sally, that people don't understand what Jesus means to a Muslim and the depth of reverence and love that Muslims have for Jesus.
Well, I do think that that's a huge problem in this country, is that people do not understand how Muslims feel about Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, and that they say, peace be upon him. They consider him a great prophet.
And here's I'm giving you a poem written in the 14th century. A love poem to Jesus. Please.
Tom, you
So-
asked about the internet, and one of the things that I would say is that I think that it's been very heartening for us at On Faith, is that the traffic is just really skyrocketing. And I think just because, I mean, if anything good comes out of this whole mosque debate, is that people are now beginning to see that religion touches everything. I mean, it's not just about Islam, but it's about abortion and gay rights and the health care bill and the wars and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Arab-Israeli issues, that there's almost nothing in our lives that isn't and somehow touched by religion. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to show people, is that you've got to know and understand this in order to be able to function in this country. You can't be informed or educated unless you understand religion.
Thank you. We have time for the last two questions, maybe one after the other, and then we'll break in about 5 minutes.
Okay, question. My name is Jonathan Hopkins. I'm a grad student here at Georgetown. How do we best educate those that equate Islam with terror? Because my best guess is they're probably not here in the room at Georgetown right now, and they probably don't read the Post a lot. How do we best reach out to those? Is it simply through outspoken voices of Muslim scholars within our country? Or does it also mean that we need to reach people, or how do we find other people of credibility that those folks will listen to? Strange thing to think about is, like President Bush, 90% of Floridian Muslims voted for Bush in 2000. I mean, there's kind of some unique intersects here, but is there some way to find people of credibility that those folks will listen to? Isn't that the most critical group to reach?
Thank you.
The reason Muslims voted for Bush... Sorry.
Sorry, I'm Helen McConnell, and I am a supporter of and spokesperson for the Charter for Compassion. And I was struck in the beginning of your remarks that you said there is such a dearth of compassion in our world. Now, these controversies of the past week, I am aware that I listened to the interview of Imam Faisal last night on Larry King Live and followed his argument very well. A friend of mine remarked to me today that he is appealing to reason and rationale, as you are, knowledge, logic. Much of the problem in America today, I believe, stems from emotion, and emotion does not listen well to reason. It closes it out. Yet some of our political voices appeal very well to emotion. Some of them have been named. I don't need to rename them. My question then is, how do we go about embedding compassion in America so that we can bridge this divide between reason and emotion, which seems to be such a disconnect? I believe that compassion is the key, so I'm wondering how you would respond to that.
Again, this is a challenge for each one of us in all our faiths, and as a scholar of religion, I'm inspired by reading religious texts in all the faiths, all the great faiths. Let me give you one random example, Mahatma Gandhi. Now, I'm a Muslim, but I'm inspired by the fact that Mahatma Gandhi, and Mahatma means the great soul, would start the day by reading religious texts from each faith. So he's not of the Abrahamic faiths, but he would have the Bible read, he would have the Quran read. How do you think Gandhi would feel if he was told that a priest is about to burn the Quran? So again, each one of us has to develop that compassion. You have Mother Teresa, you have Mandela, you've produced leaders with compassion, Martin Luther King Jr. here in the United States. You have extraordinary leaders being produced in the world. Each one of us has to constantly aspire to that level of endeavor, that level of challenge, because we are living through extraordinary times. These are times of great challenge, not only to America, but to the world. Now, one of the things that we found as we traveled was that all communities, not just Muslims, all communities, whites, African Americans, Mexicans, everyone feels under siege. Everyone feels threatened. It's the economy, it's the immigration issue, it's the first non-white president, it's Islam. We're all feeling rattled. And what is the antidote? The antidote is compassion. Because compassion creates understanding of the other, reaching out to the other, building bridges, and sacrifice. And I've just defined the heart of all the faiths, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's Hinduism. So let's go back to discovering our common humanity and not just making these lines in the sand. That is why, Sally, I get very uncomfortable with the American tendency to have this sort of black and white attitude to the world. You're with us or against us. Because life is not that simple. I wish it were, but it isn't. We are human beings. We're very complex creatures.
Well, it's a shame to cut off the conversation. I think we've covered an amazing amount of ground in just over an hour. Clearly, there's a lot more we can touch on. I like the fact that we moved from the headlines, the breaking stories, back into history, around the world, back to the headlines, and ended up looking forward at all the work that is yet to be done. We're done for this evening. I do want to shout out some thanks here at the end to the staff members who helped to make this event possible, Abby Waldrop, Jamie Scott, and Melody Fox Ahmed. To you all for coming out, and please join me in thanking our guests for a very stimulating conversation.
Thank you.
أفمن شرح الله صدره للإسلام فهو على نور من ربه فويل للقاسية قلوبهم